So thank you everyone that was able to join us today. We at the Society of Professional Journalists International Community are so excited to start our series of conversations. And I can't imagine a better way to start out these series of conversations than with a collaboration with Google News Labs and Storyful. So we have with us today Nicholas Whitaker, who is the Media Outreach Manager at Google News Labs. And also, we have the pleasure of having Mandy Jenkins, who is the head of news at Storyful. Now, together they provide a wonderful foundation for journalists to take their reporting to the next level with their platforms and tools. So before we go deeper into our conversation, I want to let you guys know or mention that the SPJ International Community is comprised of amazing journalists in the United States and globally that are reporting on international matters and also have a passion for following global news or trends. So to create a unique experience for our community, we've asked them to provide questions and topics that they would like to be covered by our speakers, and that will be how we start our conversation. But I also welcome everyone that's involved in the conversation today to be engaged. And if a question pops up, please feel free to include them, and we'll do our best to weave them in today. So thank you both for joining us today. And
thanks for having me.
Thank you. So I'd love to start with Nicholas. Nicholas, is it okay if you give us a brief background on what exactly the goals are at Google News Lab in regards to their work with journalists globally?
Yeah, most definitely. So the easiest and best way to find out more information about the News Lab, I'd recommend definitely to check out our website. If you go to g.co/newslab, there's an enormous amount of information there, not only about our team, but also the partnerships that we have with other groups around the world. For example, Storyful, which we'll be talking a little bit more about today, as well as the First Draft Coalition, Hacks Hackers, SPJ and ONA. Like, there's a large conglomeration of various different organizations that we work with, and it's all towards the same general goal, which is to foster a robust and independent press. And the way that we look at it on the News Lab is if we can help journalists really optimize the way that they're working online, mainly through our tools, through Google's tools, and use those to the best of their ability, then overall that can lead to better and higher quality journalism, which people will want to share and want to distribute more broadly across the internet. So it's really a win-win situation for Google as well as for journalists. You know, if we can help them, it actually helps us out in the end as well. And we visit newsrooms around the world. I think we're somewhere up there, number of around 15,000 journalists worldwide that we've trained. Just in the last couple of years. It's about 130 different newsrooms across like 38 different countries. So we've been quite a few places. A lot of those trips I've taken myself. So it's been a real pleasure to be able to travel around the world, kind of get an idea for what's going on in the journalism space at a global scale.
Wonderful. That's amazing. Now transitioning over to Storyful, Mandy, so this platform has been stated to be the first social news agency. What exactly does that mean, and can you give us a brief understanding of how that comes into play for journalists, especially when they're reporting on international matters?
Yeah, so Storyful started in 2010. It was actually kind of started in the midst of the Arab Spring when there was such a a surge coming out of user-generated content and eyewitness journalists and kind of everything in between on the spectrum coming out of the protests, coming out of coverage. There are places where maybe the professional journalists and weren't able to get in at the time. So much of what we knew about what was happening because of people who were involved or just happened to be there, happened to be on the ground. And so much of their media that they were giving out there, whether it was video or photos, was just being taken and being used by a variety of news organizations, maybe without verification, maybe without credit, maybe without even really knowing where it was coming from. And so our company was created in response to that. So our mission is to discover, verify, and then actually get rights to eyewitness content that's coming out of lots of different stories that are going on around the world, whether it's everything from a breaking story like a major protest or an earthquake or a landslide to kind of more of the everyday, just kind of things that are happening that are breaking news, whether it's in the US and Europe, Asia, Middle East. We're getting a little bit of everywhere. But what that means is when we're finding, say, a video from somebody who was take the Paris attacks, for instance, someone who was inside the Bataclan when the first gunshots rang out. They happened to be filming. They had a a great video and they put it out online, and that's the first thing we're seeing from there. So we get into verify to make sure we know where this is coming from, if this is actually real, if this is tied to other events, if we can line this up against other things that are going on. Also, who the source of the video is. So are they actually there? Are they really connected? And then working with that person who filmed that video to get the rights to news organizations that we work with so they can incorporate that into their coverage, whether they're writing a article for the web, they're going to be sharing it on social media, they're going to be incorporating this into a video package, going straight to air on broadcast. So we're getting it, making sure it's real, and getting it into the hands of news organizations.
You know, it's very fascinating, this concept, right? So what is the process for your team when something like the Paris attacks happens? Can you tell us, from inception to actually going through the verification, how long does this take? What are the steps that you guys take in order to do this, to be very efficient in the verification process?
Sure. So it's going to be a little different from story to story. I mean, the general process is the same, so I'll tell you that part, but kind of depending on where it comes from and what we know about it going in, it's going to change the timing and the process that we have that goes into that. But taking Paris as a for instance, this was here in the U.S. anyway. It was like late afternoon, early evening. We have someone on duty all the time who's generally kind of watching all of our signals that are out in the world. And they're watching YouTube streams, they're watching Twitter, they're keeping tabs on whether it's organizations, journalists, government, police, everything that's on the ground, kind of everywhere in the world, and we look for a spike of activity that tells us that news is breaking. We have a lot of proprietary technology we use for that, but really a lot of it is just lots and lots of lists and lots of watching and having a million tabs open. It's definitely an acquired taste to learn how to do that without going crazy. But the person who was doing that at the time was seeing, okay, there's a spike of activity here. There's some explosions that are heard at this soccer stadium. And then, oh, there's a spike of activity here where there's a shooting outside of this restaurant that's not that far from there. But at the time, still not necessarily thinking these things are connected. And then a spark of activity of, oh, there's someone taking hostages inside of this concert venue. And then really starting to see that these events are tied together. And then for us, the next steps are using some of our tools, but also kind of the old school journalism of, okay, what can we do to look just in this area? So the tools that can help us search within that area, tracking who's retweeting who. So if we have journalists who are already starting to follow that on the ground, whether they're freelancers, whether they're working for French media, whether they were people who just happened to be out that night, starting to follow who those people were, what they're telling us about what they're seeing. And from there, really starting to kind of put together, okay, this is what's happening, this is the timeline of events. Here are 4 or 5 people who have already been sharing photos and videos of what's been happening in one of these 3 locations. We can start to see from there, okay, can we get in touch with these people? It's a scary situation right now, so maybe not. But starting to dig in on those people, see, okay, are they from France? If they're not from there, what reason do they have to be there? Are these real, or did they get this from someone else? Because in big stories like this, especially the bigger the story is as it goes on over the course of the night, people are going to be constantly grabbing a video from one source. Maybe someone sent it to them on WhatsApp, or maybe they saw it on Facebook and then they download it, they put it up on their YouTube channel. And that person isn't necessarily thinking they're doing something wrong. They just want to share this video out, like, wow, you see this? And it's for us to find out, is that person the one who really shot that video? Are they really there? And really tracing back to find originals. And doing all this in real time as we're trying to get updates out to our clients. As our clients are coming to us, newsrooms all over the world are coming to us and saying, have you guys seen this video? What do you know about this photo? This guy, we're seeing his tweets. Is this guy really inside of the Bataclan right now? So we're lots and lots of moving parts. And we ended up calling, we ended up having about 20 people on duty at one point, just chasing down all of these different storylines, different people, figuring out what was going on, and really starting to get access to some of this amazing video and photos that we really would have no other way of getting because journalists weren't yet there yet. So that was something that really, over the course of 24 hours, sometimes it took a long time to clear some of them because of copyright. If you're being held hostage inside of a concert venue, you may not be checking your phone to see if someone's contacting you about a video that they want to use on the New York Times website. But some things we got pretty quickly, too, where people were immediately like, yes, everyone, please just publish these, use these. I want people to know about this. So for all of that, when we're doing things like, in terms of the verification itself, a good for instance is if we had a video that was taken from inside the soccer stadium of people singing the French national anthem as they're walking out in these huge crowds. So we're looking, for one thing, using Google Earth to look at their surroundings of where they're walking out. Okay, looking straight into Street View, we know they say it's the stadium. Can we look around and see, does the background of this video, the things they're walking past, line up with what's on Google Earth? In this case, it did. This sign, this restaurant, this awning that we're seeing over here. Okay, yeah, this definitely is happening here. Are other people talking about this? So they're seeing, are other people who are at the stadium tweeting, Instagramming, sending YouTube videos, whatever the case might be, that can tell us that more than one person witnessed this, to kind of start corroborating that against one another. In this person, are they a fan of one of these teams? Do they live in Paris? Is this something that was taken from somebody else? So doing those kinds of things too, of looking at their social history. If it was somebody who was not from Paris, was there a picture 2 days earlier of them outside Charles de Gaulle Airport doing their selfie, like, "Hey, I'm here. I'm in France." That would tell us that, yeah, they had a reason to be there. So it's a lot of those kinds of questions. And honestly, we as journalists are asking all the time. But instead of interviewing a person maybe face-to-face, we're generally interviewing a video or a photo. What is everything I can know about this? And to what degree of certainty can I say it's real?
Yeah, it seems like lots of different elements come into play when it comes to reporting this way. So I'm going to head into our first community question, head that over to Nicholas. So you obviously travel a lot with the News Lab at Google, training journalists to use digital tools for modern storytelling. Our member would like to know, what are some trends that you're seeing among journalists globally? Are different regions requesting specific resources or tools? And if so, can you tell us about that?
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting because, depending on where you're at in the world, there's a lot of different kind of conflicting issues as far as the monetization strategies that people are taking on to try to stay solvent, the bandwidth limitations depending on, where they're at in the world. But for the most part, I think that, what we find is it's the same general questions kind of across the board. People are very interested in learning how to better utilize search, how to get more information from a limited amount of time that they spend actually searching for things online. There's a lot of tips and tricks that we put together on the g.co/newslab site, which kind of addresses exactly that. And actually, a lot of the techniques that Mandy was talking about around verification, is becoming more and more of an issue. As social media becomes more of a prevalent source of finding and distributing content and information, verification and fact checking, I think is like a paramount importance. And we're actually putting together in conjunction with First Draft Coalition, which is a group of experts from around the world that work with fact checking and verification, training and curriculum specifically geared towards journalists that are trying to find more information about these tools. And on the g.co/newslab site, we're working specifically with Google's tools, but that's not to say that those are the only tools that people are using by any means to do this kind of content, to do this kind of research. And as Mandy was mentioning, it's everything from kind of investigative journalism and looking into their Facebook pages and into their social media accounts, but then how do all these various different products work in conjunction with one another? So I think for the most part, what I run into, it's not so much individual tools that people are as interested in. It's more about workflows and how do all these things work together? How do I work with these in an elegant way in a very short period of time to really get down to the facts of the matter so that I can move on about my day? And I try to encourage people as much as possible to really self-teach. A lot of this information, it's publicly available. It's out there. There's training and tutorials and education available from a variety of different sources. SPJ and ONA and Pointer and these other journalism associations, they provide training on their own, either in person or via remote or online resources. And we're trying to work with those different groups, especially overseas, to find, are there experts within those regions that we can train on our behalf to go out and then do deeper trainings with those journalists in those regions as well. So, I guess to answer your question more succinctly, I don't think it's necessarily like individual tools, but it's kind of like this whole new landscape of what it means to be a journalist in the digital age. And a lot of people are just trying to stay on top of that. And we're doing our best to try to provide those resources in a way that's easy for people to find.
Kind of segues into this first question we have from the community that's watching, from Gemma Garcia. She says, do you think that techniques for writing to Google and journalistic writing techniques may be attached? Are SEO and traditional journalism compatible? Should journalists write for search engines or think about their readers?
Yeah, I could take that one. It's actually a comment or a question that we get quite a bit. And I would start with the first part of her question there and really say that I don't think that it can be defined in polarities like that. I don't think that necessarily when you look to the future of journalism, it's one or the other. And I think that the core question there is, should we be, thinking heavily about SEO, writing for search engines and writing in such a way that makes it easier for people to surface my content? And that's kind of a tricky question, because what you're really asking there is, do I change the quality or the style of my content to better match algorithms? And I don't know necessarily that that's the best question to be asking. I think the better question to be asking with that is, who is my audience? What type of content are they interested in? Am I crafting content in such a way that it makes it easy for them to find, which I think is to some degree a bit about SEO. And that comes down to like using tools that are readily available to you, like maybe even Google Trends, for example, like searching and figuring out like what topics people are interested in right now, what are they searching for, what terms are they using to search for those topics, and am I using those terms in the headline of my article and the body of my article so that it makes it easier for people to surface that content when they do a search online. So it does have a relationship to SEO, in a very broad sense, but not in the same way that I think that most people think about SEO, where it's really about optimizing individual elements within the page there. I think that very very strongly, I feel that focusing on quality content, on high quality journalism that's vetted, that's verified, that's accurate, that's factual, and that's timely, that encourages people to share that content and find that through search engines using appropriate keywords. But I don't think it's necessarily a polar definition there. I don't think it's like one or the other. I think it's about taking the best techniques and tips and tricks on distributing content via social media and online, and applying that to your journalistic practice and your journalistic rigor.
Wonderful. Now, our next community question, I'm going to shoot that over to Mandy. Mandy, discovery and verification of social content is key at Storyful. But what does this user-generated content mean for the future of journalism and journalists that aim to report on international stories?
I definitely think that user-generated content, or what I kind of prefer the term eyewitness content, because they're definitely, that's their role often, and the people that we're working with on that. I think it definitely goes hand in hand with journalism. For one thing, often the work that we're getting from eyewitnesses are to events where maybe journalists weren't there for the beginning, because it's something that was breaking. Of course, they didn't necessarily know in advance it would be there. Journalists will be there to get aftermath, to get that really necessary reporting about how did this happen, who was involved here, what's the investigation for, making sure, say in the case of Paris, people are brought to justice, the people are being found, what caused all of this. All of that still doesn't happen without the work of dedicated journalists. Maybe they weren't there for those first few minutes because they weren't the eyewitnesses, but what they do is incredibly important, and I think that's how those two things can very much fit together. And to another degree, too, there's going to be situations where journalists can't get in. I think of so much that we're getting from Syria right now, There's so much coming from activists, from people who are really, but they're putting themselves on the line, and it's tough for journalists, even when they want to get in there, to be reporting from that region. So we're really getting a very necessary look at what day-to-day life is like, not only inside of Syria, but for refugees who are on their path out of there, that we can really see no other way except for from the eyewitnesses and the people who are living that experience right now. So the role of journalists in that is making other people aware of that story, contextualizing it, understanding where it all fits in.
Now that you mentioned Syria and all these locations where it's very tumultuous for journalists, it's difficult for getting content out, and it's also the matter of safety for them. I mean, to what extent do you guys put that into consideration, the safety of these journalists, when you're looking for the content and actually publishing it out there for the world to see?
The safety of not only the journalists, but the people who are actually portrayed in videos and photos are very, very much a big issue for us. Knowing that, if this is a source that wants to remain anonymous because they're, trying to kind of operate maybe undercover, under some sort of lack of surveillance. We see this in a lot of countries where there's kind of a crackdown on police as well, and kind of police surveillance on activists. So there's lots of reasons why we'd want to protect a source, and working with the sources of that, whether they're eyewitnesses, whether they're freelance journalists who are just kind of trying to get their content and their videos and photos out there, getting their stories out there, or if they're eyewitnesses, activists, people who are trying to tell their own story, protecting them, and then thinking too, what does it mean for the people who are in these videos? Maybe they're not a part of the story, maybe they're just bystanders, but to some other forces, ISIS, for instance, isn't necessarily going to be considering, oh, they didn't know they were being filmed at the time, so we're going to let this slide that they were in this video by this activist group. So really taking care to blur things that need to be blurred, faces, anyone that can be identified that didn't know or didn't sign off to be a part of something like that. Definitely keeping them in consideration as well. And really all of this, the ethics of keeping people safe in these stories is one of the many reasons why we don't solicit content in those regions. We don't want to encourage people who think, oh, if I grab my camera and somehow sneak into Syria, I can go sell a bunch of my footage to somebody. If I can just tell Storyful, hey, you guys will buy my stuff, right? Like, well, let's think a little bit more clearly, a little bit more ethically about all of this, because we certainly don't want to put anybody in harm's way either. So we work with what has already been published out there, and that also kind of helps in that sequence of it's something that's going to make it so that it's a little bit less encouraging people to get themselves into any kind of situation that they can't remain safe.
Okay, and this is going to transition to our next community question for Nicholas. So many of our members, they're freelance independent journalists, and the community member wants to know what opportunities are available for these freelancers at the News Lab, and what kind of tools are there that's available to ensure their safety as they go report on different locations internationally.
Yeah, it's a really good question too. And I think safety and security is always of kind of paramount importance anytime that you're working with in this kind of environment. And, we're just now starting to put together our position and our resources around safety and security in conjunction with other teams within inside Google. So hopefully within the next few months we'll have additional training and tutorials that are available that kind of really focus on that in particular. But more generally speaking, I think that the key with a lot of what the News Lab does, we're not editorial, we're not producing content, we're not hiring journalists. That's really not what we're here for. We're really here for what we call outreach, or education and outreach. So providing resources, training opportunities, whether that be online or in person, working with other groups like I had mentioned before, like SPJ and ONA and other affiliate groups to provide trainings to their partners. Actually, this Hangout is one great example of that. And then also providing, best-in-class examples and case studies. So really taking a look at like what other journalists around the world are doing, and providing a platform for them. Either through case studies or providing, links to their content via our social media, using them in presentations as an example, as we're, kind of presenting to other journalists, so they can get an idea for really what's possible and what's out there. And I think that maybe that helps answer the first part of your question. The other thing too is providing thought leadership around how to think about tackling these new topics, or these regions which might not have been as much of an issue like 4 or 5 years ago. So we're working on a few different opportunities, both through producing posts on Medium and other types of social media, talking about things like data journalism, which I would just call journalism today. Taking a look at things like verification, taking a look at things like VR and 360. Are those viable means of telling a story, a more immersive story? And then finding other leaders within the industry. We're working on a few different initiatives right now. I think the First Draft Coalition is like one really great example of that. Pulling together experts in the field from around the world and lending their voice to the discussion. So as opposed to it being the News Lab or Google saying this is how journalism should be done, we're really looking out to the journalists in the industry and saying what's working well for you. What tools and tips and tricks do you recommend, so that we can provide that to a broader audience. The safety and security thing, I definitely don't want to kind of like pass on that, though. I think that's a really critical and crucial piece of the puzzle here. And one of the things that we're really working on is finding, again, those partners around the world that can really speak best to that. Most of the people on the News Lab, they're ex-journalists themselves. Not a lot of them were in conflict zones or having to deal with this type of information. So, as opposed to us trying to come together and create, some sort of guidelines for that, we're really looking to experts within the industry to come to us and to provide that type of insight. And then also looking within the company as well. There's a lot of tools that are coming down the pipeline now, which provide, like things like Project Shield and like these other types of opportunities through other teams at Google that provide, guidance around how to use VPN, how to make sure that your browsing activity is safe, how to make sure that if you're using chat apps or other types of telecommunication apps like that, that you're protected and that you know what things to look for, even just from like the very basic principles of like two-factor authentication. Making sure that your passwords are secure and complicated enough to make it difficult for a hacker to be able to extract that type of information. Or if you're on unsecure networks, making sure that you know what that means. If you're on a hotel Wi-Fi or an airplane Wi-Fi, which is usually my situation, what does that mean? What are the broader implications of using open Wi-Fi that way for security? So again, we're providing a lot of these different resources, but I think this is very much an evolving topic, and I think it's something that as journalists, we really need to make sure that we're paying attention to, because as technology progresses, as things become more integrated and complicated, it only becomes more important to make sure that you're being safe and secure when you're online and when you're traveling. Elle, I think you're muted.
Can you hear me now? Sorry. So I know that Nicholas has mentioned the First Draft Coalition, and Mandy, I wanted to send this over to you. I know you guys also are intertwined with the YouTube Newswire. Can you discuss these different platforms and how unique they are and what the benefits are for the journalists that want to use these various platforms?
Sure. Yeah, Storyful is actually a part of the First Draft Coalition and powers the YouTube Newswire. So definitely think that the YouTube Newswire in particular is created for journalists. It's curated for journalists, and what that means is the work that I was describing earlier on finding and verifying eyewitness and to some extent too, government official type stories that are coming from around the world. As we're doing that with YouTube videos, we're putting those onto the YouTube Newswire. So if you go to youtube.com/newswire, That's where you can find the videos that Storyful staff has verified. They live on YouTube. That's something that can be grabbed and put into a story that you're writing online, or a blog post, or something that you want to share out on your social accounts for stories that you're working on, stories that you're tracking. All of those have been through our process already, so you don't have to worry about sharing them out and having it come back to burn you in any way. And we definitely encourage a lot more of that. And we also have at the top of that page, by the way, there's a link to subscribe to our newsletters. You can get that mailed to you every day, too, if you just want an email newsletter of here's the videos that are popping on YouTube today from news that's happening around the world. And that's something that we've been running for almost a year now. We're coming up on our first birthday for YouTube Newswire, and that's something that we're definitely seeing some really interesting stories that kind of come across that really only happen on YouTube in some ways, and it's great to be a resource for journalists on that front. In terms of First Draft, I definitely encourage everyone to go take a look there. Especially the trainings, the case studies, not only from Storyful, but some of our partners like Verification Junkie and Midan and Reportedly, and there's a Bellingcat. There's a whole great group. I always joke that the First Draft group is sort of the Avengers of social verification. We're all out there doing our thing separately, but we come together and we're fighting crime and evil around the world when it comes to verification of social journalism.
We got our superheroes, yes. So this question came from Benjamin Bath on the Q&A section. Either one of you want to take this on. So he says, Blendle is launching in the US this Wednesday. Do you think they have the answer to how publishers persuade consumers to pay for online content? And will Americans be willing to pay for personalized recommendations as much Europeans?
I'll take a stab at this one. I always love questions like this because there's various varieties of this question, and I think the core question here is like, will X monetization strategy work for Y audience? And I think these are really, really complicated questions to answer, and quite frankly, I don't know that anybody has the real answers. I think anybody that's like, yeah, this is totally the silver bullet and this is exactly what's going to work is trying to sell you something. But I think it's really exciting. I think like Blendle and other groups like it, these kind of like pay per article or pay per view strategies, it models a lot of other strategies that have worked really well thus far, and I think that, experimentation is really the key with all of this, and I think that the more of these various different newsrooms like Blendle and like even mainstream news organizations like New York Times, I think would be a really great example. They've been doing a lot of work, playing around with different monetization strategies to find what works and really find like, what people are willing to pay for, and I think that the key with all of this, it comes down to high quality content, and I think that if I'm not mistaken, Blendle has kind of like I wouldn't quote me on this because I could be completely wrong, but if I'm not mistaken, if you're not pleased with the article, if you don't like the article, you get some sort of a credit back, or there's some sort of reciprocity there. And if that is true, I think that's a really interesting model, because what that is encouraging is it's encouraging publishers and content creators to create really good, compelling content that people would actually want to read and share and pay for, and I think that's a really great strategy, as opposed to kind of like the race to the bottom to just get a ton of content out there in the hopes that, in the kind of like shotgun approach, that something sticks and someone shares one of those different pieces. So, I think that, as far as Blendle goes, I'm interested to pay attention to it and see kind of where it goes, over the next many months, and I think that if Europe is any kind of an indication, there's definitely an appetite for it there, and I think that what it's really going to come down to for the U.S. audience or any audience is, is the content compelling? Is it interesting content that I maybe can't find elsewhere? And if so, is there a value there that's applied to it that I'm willing to pay for?
Wonderful. And so we also have a question from Jennifer Karchmer. She says, do you have stats regarding reader engagement online? So in other words, how long do people spend reading long-form journalism online, and which would help establish word count for writers?
That's not one that I really have a whole lot of information on. Mandy, do you got anything on that one?
I don't really have stats off the top of my head, but just some things that I know from some of the reading I've done. And for one thing, I definitely encourage everyone to check out some of the annual reports that come out from the Pew Research Center. They do a lot of work in this area about reader habits and really what they're doing on social, as well as kind of the kinds of stories they're reading. But I do know that people are consuming lots of different kinds of content. It's not to say everybody's in the short form now. Everything has to be super short and snackable, which is, by the way, one of my favorite words to use in response to media. Snackable media has been the big hot topic lately. But just as much, people are still reading long-form journalism. There's lots of apps that have been very specifically designed for that. They're doing it in kind of off times to some extent. You're seeing a lot more of that delving into long-form, more maybe on a desktop, or maybe they're going to be doing it on a tablet instead of on their phone, and they're going to be doing it in the evening. They've put the kids to bed. Now they can really tuck into all those stories that they saved all day that they didn't get to when they first came out. And I think that is what we have to think about when we're forming the kinds of stories we want to write. Some of them are going to be great for when you're waiting in line for your lunch and you just want to do a quick catch up on the news, but just as much there's still an appetite out there for readers for the longer form stories that they're saying, someone told me here that this is important, so how they got it is important, but I'm going to save this, I'm going to read this later, whether it's in an app like Flipboard or Pocket or something that the Chrome built-in save to read later. I think I have like 5 different means where I'm saving stories to read later all day, to read when I finally have a chance to sit down and really take all of that in. And we're seeing those habits, across the spectrum of readers. The key for journalists is thinking about which audience it is that they're going to be writing for and how they want to get that to them, but also how that content's going to find them in the first place. I know for me, when I see a long form story going around from my friends, because many of my friends are journalists, I trust their judgment quite a bit. If they're saying the story is great, I'm going to save it. And that's lucky for me, but not everybody's lucky enough to be friends with lots of journalists, so they need to get out there and find out how they could be really selling their stories on social media. This is why this is important. This is why you want to read this. This is a really compelling and interesting point in how this affects you and your community, or affects this ongoing story that you've been tracking. So those factors are what I think are more important than necessarily thinking about word counts and trying to optimize for these ever-shifting attitudes.
I know that when you mentioned the saving it for later, every platform that I'm personally on, I'm constantly, okay, I'm going to save this for later. So do you think that kind of dictates how journalists are trying to capture the attention of their audience, in their headlines, in that quick snippet, like you said, the snack full of stories that are coming in? Like, what are some things or some tips that you think that journalists should take into consideration when creating this kind of content?
So in terms of the short form, from what we're seeing, what our clients do, but also, even just as a consumer and a former writer of that kind of journalism, I think when we're thinking snackable, you have to think useful. For one thing, is this something that's going to be useful for them right now? We're giving them, it's a really interesting quote, like, whoa, Donald Trump said this today. Maybe I want to click through and read more about that, but maybe just knowing that quote is enough. Here's 3 quick summary stories of what's happening today, and say, kind of a good around the world, like around the world in tweets, or around the world in kind of short form. Okay, this is my catch up. I'm seeing what's going on. Something that's going to say either this is enough news for you for right now, or if this is something you're really into, here's a way to get more of it. And I think thinking about it that way, this is something that's useful in a small piece, but can lead to a bigger piece if it's something that you want. I think of great journalism email newsletters like the Court's email newsletter, which is fantastic. They're really great at that. Some days I just can scan it and get a really good sense of what's happening in these stories I might not have been tracking over the last 24 hours. Some of them I'm definitely going to click off and read, because I'm like, yeah, that's cool. I want to know more about that. Others, I'm like, this was enough. I'm glad I know it, but I'm not going to dig in anymore. I'm not a big markets person, but I'm glad I know about the market that's going on in China today.
Yeah, just to add to that too, and I think the newsletters is a big thing for me. Like especially with the last 6 to 12 months or so, like I've really been spending a lot of energy trying to figure out like how I consume media, how I consume news, and like what really works best for me. You know, because for a long time it was just kind of like a catch-all. It was like the Facebook and the Twitter and like the emails coming in and actually going to people's websites and reading articles, and that was just a lot to manage and deal with. And I've actually shifted a very large portion of my news consumption to newsletters. And you know, it's a wide variety of newsletters, everything from industry news for the news and journalism industry to VR and 360 industry, but then also kind of more specific ones that are catered to just interests that I have, or maybe even local media. And Denver Post, actually, I'm based out of Boulder, Colorado. I signed up for the Denver Post newsletters recently, and I've just been blown away at the type of content that's coming through there. It's very, like Mandy was saying, it's snackable. It gives me the context of why I should care about this particular article. I had the opportunity to skim through headlines that are really well written and that are factual and related to the actual article, instead of being this kind of diversion tactic to get me to click on it. And it gives me these different kind of blocks of information. And I do the same thing with other newsletters. Like I get BuzzFeed, I get Quartz, I get Wine newsletter for the journalism industry, and I get a whole list of those. And usually first thing in the morning when I come to my inbox, I sift through all of that. I throw stuff off into Pocket that I know I want to read later. And then when I come in, as Mandy was saying, later, it's usually for me later in the evening when I have time and can actually focus on a long form piece. Then that's when I kind of dig into that more deeply. But it does give me kind of this broad overview of what I might be interested in and what information might be relevant to me, but doesn't require as much attention and bandwidth as flipping through a newspaper, which I also like to do.
I love to do that too. I mean, I think I just saw someone a few days ago at the coffee shop reading a newspaper, and it really just warmed my heart, to be honest.
Human clap.
Yeah, I really wanted to give him a handshake. So we have another question from Judy Goldman. She asks, in capturing on-the-ground stories, do you see any new apps emerging for capturing, editing, sharing video, text, links, photos, audio? And what standard apps are still front runners? What do you recommend? Are there any apps journalists are using that we should be?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think I'm an Android user, kind of through and through. I used to be on iPhone like way back in the day, and that was kind of like my bread and butter. And I still definitely agree, and I think most journalists are actually on iPhones these days still. iPhones have amazing cameras and they have amazing video, and a lot of the new Android phones do as well. And I think that if you have one of these devices in your pocket, I mean, you basically have a supercomputer / production studio in your pocket now. You don't necessarily, like, I came out of the broadcast and video production world, so like having a giant camera on my shoulder and tripods and gear and lights and all this other stuff, like that's not tenable in most situations. Like, so a lot of what I've been looking towards is kind of like what I call backpack journalism. Like, what can you throw into a backpack, run out into the field, and capture what you need? I've got a whole collection of stuff like in my office that I'm testing on a regular basis. But I think that the apps on phones today are really amazing. And there's a lot of different workflows that you can use to kind of organize your information as it's coming in, and make sure that you're keeping it organized and you're able to share it more broadly. I see a lot of people using things like Snapchat and Instagram, obviously, and Twitter and Facebook. Those would be kind of like the obvious go-tos. But then there's more production-oriented apps that I'm really excited about as well. I was actually just talking with a gentleman the other day from a group called Filmic Pro, which is a pro video app for iPhone and Android. And it gives you an amazing amount of control over the professional quality controls that you would want, from frame rate to shutter speed and everything in between. Actually, the Google Photo app, I think, has in leaps and bounds improved over the last many years, and just the Photos app itself. 9 times out of 10, like when I reach for a camera, it's not my professional DSLR camera, it's my cell phone. And that's been something that, as a photographer, I've been struggling with for a long time. Is like the philosophical implications of that. But I think that now with cameras where they're at, you're able to document in a much higher quality than you were able to before, and you can actually share that right from your mobile phone. You don't need to wait to go back to your desk and process that. just from an organizational standpoint, like to organize research that's coming in. I mean, we mentioned Pocket earlier. I use that religiously, and there's a bit of a black hole in my pocket right now, unfortunately, of a backlog. I think this is kind of a systemic issue with Pocket, and I'm okay with it. I will get to those articles at some point, but I do use tags to organize my life quite a bit more easily using that. From audio standpoint, I've actually been playing around with a lot of the new Zoom tools recently. The Zoom H4n as a little tiny pocket recorder. There's an app that you can actually download for your mobile phone, which allows you to plug a little Zoom XY axis recorder directly into the phone jack on your phone and use that as a microphone recorder. And I tested that for a little bit, and I thought that was actually a really pretty well-crafted tool, hardware and software there. I was actually just looking, I think it was a BuzzFeed article that came in this morning. It was talking about like top 10 GIF or GIF apps for your phone, which I thought was really, really interesting, and I'll share the link to that afterwards. But I think that there's a lot of resources out there for people, and one of the things that we're working on hopefully soon is mobile reporting on g.co/newslab, and really putting together a list of trainings and tutorials from people out in the field who are using these tools to talk about what apps they're working with and what they're not. But I would say that like the best rule of thumb that I would recommend is don't be limited by like what tools you have, like what apps you have on your phone. It's not about that, I don't think. Any generic phone has a camera app and a recording app on it, which will allow you to go out there and capture the story. So if you're crafting your story well, if you have a good narrative, if you're using compelling shots, it doesn't really matter what app you're using necessarily. Just go out there and do it.
Mandy, do you have any apps or tips that you have with, what journalists should be using in regards to Judy's question with apps?
I think to somewhat echo to Nick's point there, I think experimenting quite a bit. I can't really think of any one app. I'm like, yeah, this is definitely what everybody needs for their work. This is the only one. It's about seeing what works for you, what's going to be easiest, your level of comfort. I would also say not to ignore streaming apps. Doing live streams. Live streams are increasingly such a huge part of reporting for us, especially with things coming from the ground and wherever you are. The live video is really important to a lot of readers and to fellow journalists, and really just in terms of what activists are doing out there with that too. So being comfortable with those live stream apps. I've recently been introduced to a video app that I've been kind of in love with. If you guys want to try it out, it's called Videolicious. And if you're not used to doing, say, putting together a quick video package on your phone where there's a stand-up, you're talking over video, you've got video you've shot, it really puts it together really quickly and easily, and I find it to be a pretty fun intro app for kind of putting together those kinds of quick, easy video packages using mobile. I was working with my 9-year-old niece on it over the weekend, and we were having a great time doing newscasts together. So if a 9-year-old can do it, I'd like to think we all can.
That's awesome. So Nick, we have a question from Benjamin again. Does the Google News Lab collaborate with the D School's Media Experiment Project?
I'm not sure what the D School's Media Experiment Project is, but I'd be interested to learn more about it.
We also have another question from our community. What have been some obstacles from your respective platforms, and where do you see it headed in the next few years?
I can talk a little bit to that one. I think that adoption is probably like one of the, and awareness would probably be the two big things for me. And I think there's something on the order of like 18 or 19 different tools that Google has. Everything from Google Maps to Fusion Tables to Google Earth to Trends to YouTube to, just the list goes on and on and on. And I think that more times than not, what I encounter when I go into a newsroom or I go and speak in front of a conference or on an event like this, typically what I get from people is like, I didn't know these tools existed, or I didn't realize that this tool could do all of those things. So, I think for me, it's always going to come back to the education element, making sure people are aware that these tools are available, that there are techniques that you can use to get the best possible use out of them, and encourage that sense of experimentation, that sense of play, that I think that it hasn't always been kind of like the norm in this industry. Like, I don't think that people have always been encouraged to experiment. It's been like, this is what works. Let's continue doing it this way. Let's get it out there. And I'm really encouraged and excited by the amount of interest that we get when we travel, and like people will immediately light up when we start going through some of these presentations. And originally our presentations lasted anywhere from an hour to 3 hours long, and it covered a whole broad range of different topics or different products specifically. And every single time when we walked away from those sessions, people were like, my God, I had no idea that this stuff was available. My mind is spinning right now. I have so much to go back and digest and work on. And this is something that I experience around the world. So I think for me, the biggest obstacle is just letting people know that these tools exist and that there are really professional ways to go about using them, so that they can get the best possible results out of them.
Mandy?
Yeah, I think a couple of little things that we've been seeing, aside from things like awareness, which I mean is still huge, just because of we always think, especially as journalists in our own little bubble, like everybody knows about that. When it's like, actually, yeah, a lot of people don't know about that. We need to help them get to know it in our communities pretty often. Something that we've been seeing, not necessarily a platform issue as much as kind of a change in user habits that's been affecting our work, and I think affecting the work of lots of journalists, is the move to more messaging apps on the part of eyewitnesses and people who are in the field, potential people who could be interacting with us, things that we used to find on an open platform, like YouTube, like Facebook to some extent, Twitter especially though, somewhere you could just go in and type in some keywords, and bombings, Ankara, I can find people who are talking about that. Increasingly, those conversations aren't happening in a place where you can search. They're happening in groups like WhatsApp and then Line and WeChat, and there's tons of these apps emerging. Snapchat here in the U.S. The move and the rise of those is making it difficult to get access to those stories and to get access to those people. Not impossible, but it definitely means that we have to spend more time as journalists getting ourselves into those communities, being very open, kind of taking on more of a community manager role than just a broadcasting out of, well, here's everything I know, here's everything, I'm going to search and get stuff from you. It's a lot more of a conversation and a lot more of building community. So it's certainly not impossible, but it's a challenge that I think we're only going to see more of as time keeps going on.
I guess we have one more question from the Q&A from Gemma Garcia. Do you think that the future will be a humanization of search engines or the dehumanization of journalists to adapt to this technological stage? Nicholas or Mandy, whoever.
Yeah, Gemma, you love the polarities there. I think this is a similar answer to my previous one, and I don't think that anyone can say it's going to be one or the other. And I think that the more people become comfortable with search engines and they understand better about how they work and how you can actually surface really quality content using search engines, I think that it'll become a little bit less of an obstacle and a little bit more of just like kind of yet another tool, yet another organic part of like how we do business and how we experience information around us. And actually from like the user standpoint, I think that this is for me always the question, are we providing a good user experience? Like, are people able to find the type of news and the type of information that they want? And I think that a lot of the effort that Google has been doing, since I've started working here, has been directly towards that, improving search, making sure that it works better, that you are able to get better quality content out there. The accelerated mobile pages project, I think, is another good example of that. Like, we identified an issue where mobile web experience wasn't as good as it could be. Advertising and other types of new technology has been causing the user experience to be poor. So we've created an opportunity and open sourced this project so that more people can kind of contribute to this to make that mobile web experience as good as it can be. So, is that a humanization of search engines? I don't know. I think that that's recognizing that there's an issue and then open sourcing and providing, the ability for lots of other people to chime in and to make that as good as it can be. The dehumanization of journalists to adapt to this technological stage. Like, I don't ever advocate for the dehumanization of journalism or journalists. I think that's just a bad strategy in general. But I think that there are techniques, and I think there are new technologies that are coming out that, while you can still very much be your humanized self and create really compelling content, you can also take advantage of technology to automate some of the work that you do, whether that be, like, for example, setting up Google Alerts, for example, to filter information that you have coming in to make sure that you're getting the most up-to-date information that you can get on a specific topic. Google Trends would be another one of those things where you're looking at search traffic and search data, search activity, and using algorithms to take advantage of massive amounts of data that you wouldn't be able to sift through otherwise. And you can use that to then help build a story that's more robust and more informative, that maybe helps bring more of the human aspects to a story to light. So, like, I don't necessarily think that these are, mutually exclusive things. I think that there is an anxiety there, obviously, that, like, oh my God, we're going to be replaced by robots in the future. Like, I feel like every industry has that anxiety. I don't think that that's necessarily true. It's always going to be, in some way or another, a human's going to have to tell those stories. They're human stories. They have to be told by humans. But, we can use technology. We can take advantage of emerging applications and emerging tech to make our jobs easier so that we can get better stories out there.
So before we come to a close, I just wanted to see if there's anyone else that has any questions for Nicholas or Mandy. We'll give you a few seconds here to see if you have any questions. If not, I also wanted to see what can we expect from the Google News Lab and Storyful, and also, what is it, the First Draft Coalition, YouTube, Newswire. What can we expect this year from these platforms, and what can we look forward to?
Yeah, so I can talk a little bit about the News Lab specifically. We're constantly evolving our outreach strategy and working with additional partners from around the world to bring more of our training and outreach to those areas. And it's a big part of what I've been spending the last several months doing, is figuring out, like, what regions need the most help. Where can we really focus our attention to make sure that we're getting resources, we're getting education into the hands of people that need it the most. Are there organizations that we can partner with in these different regions to make sure that those voices are being well heard and that we're really addressing the needs of those individual groups. Training online, g.co/newslab. We're going to have many, many more tutorials coming down the pipeline. I mentioned previously we have a whole section on verification that we have coming out shortly within the next few weeks. Following up after that, we're going to have even more on 360 video and VR journalism specifically, and really what that means for the news industry, and how you can work with Google's tools to get more out of that. Later on in the year, we also have additional slots set aside for things like monetization, things like safety and security, like we were mentioning earlier. So all of these together, what we're hoping to put together is a training certification. So as a journalist, you can go through all of these various different lessons, and at the end of that, you can get a certification that hopefully is recognized more broadly across the industry. And we're working with other organizations to figure out what that actually means. Like, what would a certification be, and how would that be reflected within the industry, if at all? And if not, I want it to be something more than just a gold sticker on your report card. I want it to actually be tangible and meaningful, and that could be something like creating a community of experts. So if you go through that training, you get certified, then you get access to even more information because you've shown dedication, you've shown an interest in getting deep knowledge around that. So all of those things are things we have on the plate right now, but we're also super excited to hear from other journalists. So you can always reach out to us if you have questions or comments. You can reach us on our Twitter channel at Google News Lab. We're also on Google+. We're also on Medium coming up pretty shortly, so we're going to have posts coming out that are a little bit more long form about the industry and case studies and examples like that. Or you could just email us at newslabsupport@google.com. If you're ever working on a story and you have a question, or if you get stuck, or if you're interested in a particular tool and you just don't know where to find information out about that, you can check out our site at g.co/newslab or email us at newslabsupport@google.com, and we'll be in touch. We want to hear from you.
Awesome. Mandy, how about Storyful, and then I guess if you can give us an idea about First Draft Coalition, YouTube Newswire, all those rolled into one.
Yeah, sure thing. For us, this is a big year in terms of elections, not just here in the U.S., but we're also doing work right now on elections in the Philippines, upcoming in Australia, voting in the UK, and even more as the year is going on. So there'll be a big focus for us on the YouTube Newswire, and also for us inside of Storyful as well. But that's for my team to deal with, I guess. But there's, and of course, continuing to track the story of really the refugee crisis and what's going on in Europe. That's been a huge focus for us as a company. It's been a huge focus for YouTube Newswire as well, because it is a story that's largely playing out in so many ways on YouTube. So you'll definitely be seeing more of that. In terms of First Draft, for one thing, definitely keep an eye on the site. We're publishing all the time in terms of case studies, how-tos, recommended tools. We'll only be ramping that up more and more this year because our website is still fairly new. It only came out in October. So we've definitely got a lot more we can be adding. And we'll be doing some events like this as well as part of First Draft. So doing more hangouts on air, Q&As, doing things around particular stories and topics. So keep an eye on the website of firstdraftnews.com to see when those are going to be. We're also increasingly going to be planning some in-person events at some of the newsrooms that we work with in Europe and the US. So as those public events are going to be posted, those will also be on the website. So we'll be doing a lot more public-facing conversations with the Avengers of verification pretty soon.
Awesome. Well, I just wanted to thank you both so much for taking the time to speak to our community. And you had so much valuable information, and I hope that everyone was able to take something away from this, which I'm sure they have. And also, before we end, I wanted to mention that we are announcing our second conversation, which will be taking place April 6th for all those that want to join. It will be our Iran panel, media coverage from the experts. We're going to be having speakers with that include Nigar Mortazavi, the Iranian-American journalist that covers Iran in English and Persian. She writes, reports, and tweets on Iran extensively and is a frequent commenter on Iran at MSNBC, BBC, PRI, New York Times, Al Jazeera, and Huffington Post. We're going to also be having Matteo Farzana, a Northeastern University professor, and he's also the author of The Iranian Constitutional Revolution and the Clerical Leadership of Khorasani. His information about the current elections is going to be very informative. We also will be having Suzanne DiMaggio, the head of the Iran program at New America Foundation, and we're very excited to be having them all join us on April 6th. You can get that information on our Google Plus page, and we will be creating an event. And feel free to follow us on Facebook and keep updated with all the conversations we'll be having coming up this year. So again, thank you to you guys at Google News Lab, Storyful, Mandy and Nicholas. I really appreciate your time. And yeah, that seems to be it.
Great. Thanks so much for having us.
Yeah, thanks for your questions, everyone.
Of course, and and all the information will be linked and put into a link in the comments at the end of this Google Hangout. So everything that we have talked about today will include for everyone to see.
That's great. And also just a quick heads up to everybody that if you didn't catch the entire event and you wanted to watch the replay of it, this will also be available on our YouTube account at Google News Lab. And then we'll also share that around to everybody else through various social networks. So definitely stay in touch, and we'll see you next time. Thanks, everybody.
Wonderful. We'll see you next time. Bye-bye.